and already a millionaire by the time she was in her mid-30s. Years of hard work, business skills, and courage had built her empire, and she lived in a beautiful mansion that overlooked the city lights. Her life was not only about money but also about passion. She loved traveling, helping charities, and spending time with people who inspired her. Yet, even with all her success, she never imagined how quickly everything could change. One evening, after a long day of meetings, she was on her way home. The city was glowing with traffic lights and moving cars, but fate had something unexpected waiting. A sudden accident turned her bright world into complete darkness. The sound of screeching tires, the breaking of glass, and the sharp shock of pain were the last things she remembered. In a matter of moments, her life changed forever. She was rushed to the hospital, unconscious. Doctors worked tirelessly to save her life. Machines beeped, nurses hurried, and her family stood outside the emergency room in tears, praying that she would survive. She did survive, but not in the way anyone had hoped. She slipped into a coma, her body alive but her mind silent, locked away in a deep sleep that no one could predict the end of. For her family, it was like losing her but still having her there. She lay in the hospital bed with her eyes closed, breathing with the help of machines, not speaking, not moving. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and soon, the months became years. People came and went, visitors whispered, and her once busy life turned into a still frame. Her home stood empty while her business was handled by others. Friends who once celebrated with her slowly stopped visiting. The hospital room became her world. Among all the doctors who had cared for her, one stood out. He was much younger than her, a doctor in his early 30s who had recently joined the hospital. Unlike many others who treated her case as just another hopeless patient, he saw something different. He believed she could wake up. He couldn't explain why, but he had this strong feeling that she was listening somewhere deep inside. So, while others simply checked her vitals and moved on, he would spend extra time with her. He would sit by her side and speak to her as if she could hear every word. He read her books, stories that she had once loved. He played gentle music, sometimes the classics, sometimes soft melodies. He updated her about the world outside the seasons, the weather, even the news. He told her how the world was moving forward, and how her family was doing. He didn't know if she could hear him, but he never stopped talking. The nurses noticed his efforts. Some admired his dedication, while others quietly wondered if he was becoming too attached. But he didn't care. For him, she was more than a patient. She was a human being who deserved to be treated with dignity, even in silence. He believed that even though her body was still, her soul was awake somewhere. Her family, although grateful, had mixed feelings. They were losing hope as years passed. Doctors had warned them that the longer she remained in a coma, the smaller her chances of waking up. Some relatives even suggested letting go, stopping the expensive treatments, and moving her to long-term care. But the young doctor never supported that idea. He convinced them to keep fighting for her, saying that miracles happen when no one expects them. His words gave them strength, even when their faith was weak. As the years stretched on, her condition remained unchanged. To most people, she was just a body that breathed but did not live. Yet to him, she was a fighter, silently holding on. He noticed the smallest details that others ignored: a twitch in her finger, a change in her heartbeat when certain music played, the way her eyes moved under her closed lids. These tiny signs kept his hope alive. There were days when he felt tired, too. Watching someone lie motionless for so long could break even the strongest spirit. But every time he thought of giving up, he remembered her story. He had read about her life, her achievements, and her determination. She had once built an empire from nothing. Surely, she had the strength to come back from this as well. And so, he stayed. Outside her hospital room, life continued. New patients came, some recovered, some didn't. The seasons changed, years rolled by, but her story remained paused. The city that she once ruled with her business skills now forgot her name. Yet, inside that quiet hospital room, one person still believed in her return. Sometimes, during late-night shifts, he would sit alone with her and speak from his heart. He told her about his own dreams, his struggles as a young doctor, and how much he wanted to make a difference. He admitted that he didn't know why he felt so connected to her, but he trusted that someday she would open her eyes. His words, spoken softly in the stillness, filled the room with a warmth that no machine could provide. Though she could not respond, it was as if his voice reached somewhere deep inside her sleeping mind. He didn't know it, but she was not entirely gone. Her body was asleep, but fragments of sound, feelings, and moments floated in her hidden world. She could not wake up, but she felt a sense of comfort in those voices, especially his. Somewhere in her silence, a bond was forming, fragile but real. And so, her life in silence went on. To the world, she was a forgotten millionaire lying in a hospital bed. But to him, she was a story not yet finished. He was determined to wait, no matter how long it took, because he believed that one day, she would come back not only to life but also to herself. The hospital became her second home, not just for her, but for the young doctor as well. He had been assigned many patients over the years, but somehow, she remained different. Most doctors measured their work in results: patients who healed, patients who didn't. But he measured his work with her in something else: patience, persistence, and hope. Every morning before starting his rounds, he would visit her room. Her bed was always clean, her face calm, and the quiet rhythm of machines filled the air. Some days he would greet her with a cheerful, "Good morning, you're looking strong today," even though she never answered. On other days, he would sit by her side and hold her hand for a few minutes, speaking to her softly. Nurses would often pass by and smile at the scene. It was unusual, but it was also touching. He began to add little things to her routine. He asked her family what books she loved to read when she was healthy. They brought him boxes of novels, poetry collections, and even her business journals. Whenever he had time, he would sit near her bed and read aloud, his voice steady and warm. Sometimes he read for an hour, sometimes just a few pages, but he never let her feel forgotten. He believed that words, even if they could not be answered, could still reach the soul. Music also became part of her world. He brought a small speaker and played the songs that her family said she enjoyed. Gentle piano pieces, soft classical music, and even some cheerful tracks that once made her dance. Nurses noticed that sometimes, when a certain melody played, her heartbeat changed slightly on the monitor. It was a tiny sign, but to him, it was enough proof that she was still there. He never ignored these moments. To him, they were little whispers of hope. His colleagues often questioned his devotion. Some of the older doctors said, "You are wasting your energy. She has been like this for years. Focus on the patients who can recover." But he never listened. To him, she was not just a patient, she was a person with a history, a family, and perhaps a future. He couldn't bring himself to treat her as if she were only a case number in a hospital file. The more time he spent with her, the more he learned about the woman she once was. Her sister told him stories about her childhood: how she was always ambitious, always the one to lead, even as a little girl. Friends described her as brave, generous, and full of life. He listened carefully, building an image of her in his mind. She was not just someone lying on a bed. She was a complete person with dreams, victories, and laughter, and he treated her as if she could hear every detail. But his devotion was not easy. There were days when frustration caught him. He was human after all. There were nights when he walked out of her room feeling powerless. Medicine was a science, but it could also be cruel. It didn't always give answers. Still, even in those dark moments, he returned the next day with the same hope. Somewhere deep inside, he believed she was fighting, even if no one could see it. Her family began to notice his persistence. At first, they thought it was just professional duty, but soon, they saw how much heart he was putting into her care. Her mother once told him, with tears in her eyes, "You treat her as if she were your own family. We will never forget this." He simply smiled and said, "She deserves it." Years passed, and still she remained in her silent world. But he never stopped bringing new ideas. He introduced small therapies, gentle massages to keep her muscles from stiffening, light exercises to move her arms and legs, even talking about the colors of the clothes she was dressed in, as if she could hear and care about the details. To others, it may have seemed meaningless, but to him, it was a bridge between her silence and his hope. At times, he even shared his personal life with her, almost as if she were a friend who listened quietly. He told her about his long shifts, about the challenges of being a young doctor, and about the moments when he felt uncertain. There was no reply, no advice, but strangely, speaking to her gave him peace. In her silence, he found a listener who never judged him. The hospital staff sometimes teased him gently. "You spend more time with her than anyone else," they said. He would laugh it off, but deep inside, he knew it was true. He didn't know why, but he felt a connection to her story, to her fight. He admired her strength, even though she could not show it. He often imagined what she would say if she woke up and heard about the years he had stayed by her side. There was one night that stayed in his memory forever. It was a stormy evening, rain hitting the hospital windows hard. The lights flickered, and the building was unusually quiet. He was making his rounds when he decided to check on her. He sat by her bed, listening to the rain outside, and spoke to her softly. "The world outside is wild tonight. But don't worry, you're safe here." He took her hand and felt the warmth of her skin. For a moment, he thought he saw her finger twitch. It was so faint, so small, that no one else noticed. But it was enough for him. He stayed there the entire night, holding her hand, convinced that she was still reaching out in her own way. Little signs like these became his fuel. A flicker of her eyelid, a shift in her breathing, a sudden movement that could not be explained. Other doctors dismissed them as muscle reflexes, but he believed differently. To him, they were signals, like tiny lights in a dark tunnel. Each one told him to keep going, to never give up. His devotion became a quiet story inside the hospital. Other patients' families sometimes noticed him sitting by her side, reading, or speaking gently. They whispered among themselves about the young doctor who cared too much. But those whispers didn't bother him. He wasn't looking for recognition. He wasn't doing it for praise. He was doing it because, deep in his heart, he knew that every human life deserved this kind of respect. Time, however, was a cruel test. 5 years passed. Then 6. To the outside world, she was just a forgotten millionaire lying in silence. But to him, she was still alive, still waiting for her chance to return. Every day, he walked into her room with the same faith. His persistence was no longer just about medicine, it had become personal. In the quiet of that hospital room, a bond had been formed. It was invisible to everyone else, but it grew stronger with each passing day. Though she could not open her eyes, though she could not speak, something in her presence tied him to her. And in his voice, in his care, in his belief, she found the strength to hold on. The morning began like any other in the hospital. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, the soft hum of machines filled the room, and the young doctor walked in with his usual calm determination. He carried a book in his hand, one of her favorites, and sat beside her bed. As always, her eyes were closed, her breathing steady, her body still. He greeted her gently, as he always did. "Good morning. Today is a bright day." The sun is shining outside. I think you would have liked it. He opened the book and began reading. The room was quiet except for his voice. The nurses came and went, checking the monitors, adjusting the sheets, but he stayed focused on her. He had grown used to this routine, speaking to her as though she were listening, telling her about the world she could not see. But that morning, something unusual happened. As he read, he noticed a faint movement in her hand. He paused, watching closely, his heart racing. Was it just another reflex, or something more? He leaned closer and whispered, "If you can hear me, try again." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, her fingers twitched once more. His chest tightened with hope. He called the nurse immediately. "Come here, look at this." The nurse rushed over, her eyes widening. "Doctor, I think she really moved." The news spread quickly. Other doctors came in, checking her responses, shining a light in her eyes, testing her reflexes. At first, some remained doubtful, but as the minutes passed, they saw her eyelids flicker. It was small, fragile, but it was real. The young doctor's heart pounded with excitement. After so many years of waiting, there was finally a sign. He stayed by her side, encouraging her, speaking softly, asking her to keep trying. The movements were weak, but they were enough to spark a flame of hope in everyone. For the first time in years, the atmosphere around her room changed. Nurses who had grown used to her stillness now whispered with excitement. Her family rushed to the hospital, tears in their eyes as they saw her trying to move. The next few days were filled with cautious hope. Her eyes began to open slightly, only for a few seconds at first, but it was progress. Each time her eyelids lifted, the young doctor was always there, smiling warmly, speaking to her gently. "It's me," he would say, "I'm here. You're safe." Her gaze was weak, unfocused, like someone learning to see again. But the fact that she was waking at all was nothing short of a miracle. The recovery was slow and painful. Her muscles were stiff from years of stillness. Every attempt to move was a struggle. But the young doctor never left her side. He guided her through physical therapy, encouraged her when she grew tired, and celebrated even the smallest achievements. When she managed to lift her hand, he clapped softly, saying, "You did it. That's amazing." When she whispered her first sound, barely more than a breath, he leaned close and listened as though it were the most beautiful thing in the world. Her family surrounded her with love. Her mother cried the first time she opened her eyes fully and looked around the room. Her siblings took turns holding her hands, speaking to her, reminding her of all the years she had missed. But among all the faces, hers always lingered on the young doctor. Though her vision was still blurry, she could recognize his voice instantly. It was the voice that had been with her in the silence, the one that never stopped speaking when everyone else had grown tired. Deep inside, she remembered it. As her strength slowly returned, she began to understand what had happened. The world she had left behind was gone, replaced by years she had lost. She had gone into a coma as a woman in her 30s, full of energy and success. Now she woke up older, weaker, surrounded by changes she couldn't fully grasp. Businesses she once managed had moved on without her. Friends she once laughed with had grown distant. The city outside had changed. It was overwhelming, like stepping into a world that no longer belonged to her. At times, she felt lost and broken. "I've lost so many years," she whispered to her family. "What was I even living for?" But whenever despair touched her heart, the young doctor was there. He reminded her of the strength she had shown by surviving, of the miracle she had become. "You didn't lose those years," he told her gently. "You fought through them. You're here now, and that's what matters." His words gave her comfort. She began to notice how deeply he cared, how much time he had devoted to her even when she was unable to respond. She learned from her family how he had stayed by her side, reading to her, playing her favorite music, and never giving up. It touched her heart in ways she couldn't explain. Each time she looked at him, she saw more than a doctor. She saw the one person who had believed in her when no one else did. Her therapy sessions became moments of courage. Each step she took with the help of her therapists felt like climbing a mountain. The pain was real, but so was her determination. And always, at the end of each session, she would look for him. His presence gave her strength. She found herself waiting for his encouraging smile, his gentle voice telling her she could do more than she thought. As weeks turned into months, she began to speak more clearly. Her voice was soft, shaky, but it carried emotion. One day, when he walked into her room, she whispered, "Thank you." Just 2 words, but they carried the weight of all her years in silence. He smiled, holding back the tears in his eyes. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You did this. You found the strength to come back." But she knew the truth. Deep inside, she felt that his presence, his voice, and his faith had pulled her out of the darkness. In her dreams, she remembered hearing him speak, remembered the warmth of his words, even when she could not respond. Now that she was awake, she realized those moments had been her lifeline. Her family, too, noticed the bond forming between them. They saw how her eyes lit up when he entered the room, how her mood brightened when he spoke. Some smiled knowingly, while others kept quiet, unsure of what to think. But no one could deny that he had become more than just a doctor to her. He was a part of her story, a part of her survival. Recovery was not only about her body, it was also about her mind. She struggled with the reality of time lost, with the fear of starting over. There were nights when she cried silently, wondering if she would ever feel whole again. On those nights, he often stayed late, sitting by her side, listening to her fears. He told her stories about his own struggles, about the nights he doubted himself, about the weight of carrying responsibility. She found comfort in his honesty, realizing that she was not alone in her battles. And slowly, through pain and patience, she began to live again. She could sit up, walk short distances, and hold conversations. She laughed for the first time in years, and the sound filled the hospital room with joy. Nurses clapped, her family hugged her, and the young doctor simply stood there, smiling with pride. But inside her heart, something deeper was growing. Gratitude was turning into something warmer, something stronger. Each day she looked forward to his visits, not just because he was her doctor, but because she felt safe with him, understood by him. She had been asleep for years, but now that she was awake, she realized she was feeling something she had never expected, something that would change her life again in ways she could not imagine. Her recovery was like a new chapter being written slowly, word by word. Every day she made progress, and every day she discovered more about the world she had been absent from. The city outside the hospital had changed, technology had advanced, and even the faces around her looked older than what she remembered. At times, the change frightened her, but there was always one constant: him. The young doctor was still by her side, guiding her through this strange return to life. As she regained more strength, she began to have longer conversations. At first, they were about simple things: what day it was, what season, what news had happened recently. But as her voice grew stronger, she started asking him about the years she had lost. He told her patiently about how the world had moved forward, how businesses had changed, how even her own company had survived without her. He never rushed, never overwhelmed her. He explained things like a storyteller, making her laugh sometimes, making her think deeply at other times. She began to notice small details about him that she had never noticed before. The way his eyes softened when he spoke to her, the way he listened carefully without interrupting, the way he celebrated her smallest victories as though they were the greatest achievements. He had become more than just a doctor, he was her bridge between the life she had lost and the life she was building again. Her family was grateful beyond words, but they also noticed the closeness forming between them. They could see how she waited for him, how her face lit up when he entered the room. Her mother once teased her gently, saying, "You smile more when he's around than with anyone else." She blushed and looked away, but deep down, she knew her mother was right. Therapy sessions became moments of courage, but also of bonding. He often stayed with her during the exercises, cheering her on. When she struggled to walk with support, he was there holding her arm. When her hands trembled while trying to write again, he encouraged her to keep practicing. Every challenge became easier because he was there beside her. One afternoon, when the hospital garden was filled with blooming flowers, he took her outside in a wheelchair. It was her first time feeling fresh air in years. The sun touched her skin, the wind brushed against her face, and she closed her eyes, breathing deeply. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not from sadness but from joy. "I thought I would never feel this again," she whispered. He looked at her with a gentle smile and said, "The world has been waiting for you." Moments like these created a bond that words could hardly describe. She found herself looking forward to his visits more than anything else. When he wasn't around, she felt a kind of emptiness. She tried to convince herself that it was just gratitude, just admiration for the man who had given her hope. But deep in her heart, she began to realize it was something more. It was a warmth she had not felt in years, maybe not even before the coma. The young doctor, on the other hand, struggled quietly with his own emotions. He had promised himself to remain professional, to never cross the line between doctor and patient. Yet, each day he spent with her, he felt his heart pulling in a direction he couldn't ignore. He respected her strength, admired her courage, and found himself drawn to her laughter, her questions, and even her silences. He tried to hide it, to focus only on his duty, but feelings have a way of showing themselves even when we try to bury them. There were nights when he stayed late, watching her sleep peacefully. In those moments, he thought about the years he had spoken to her when she couldn't respond. He remembered how he had shared his fears with her, not knowing if she could hear him. And now that she was awake, he sometimes wondered if she remembered those words, if they had reached her somehow in her long silence. She did remember. Not in clear sentences, not in full conversations, but in fragments. She remembered the sound of his voice, the comfort it gave her, the way it felt like someone was holding her hand even when she couldn't move. One evening, she confessed to him, "I think I heard you sometimes, in my dreams. I don't remember everything, but your voice was always there." His heart trembled at her words, and for the first time, he couldn't hide the emotion in his eyes. Their bond was no longer invisible. The nurses noticed it, her family noticed it, even other patients noticed how different things were between them. Some whispered about it, others simply smiled, knowing that life has a way of creating stories that no one can predict. But neither of them openly admitted what they were feeling. They were caught between gratitude and love, between caution and desire. One day, during her walking therapy, she almost fell as her legs gave way. He caught her instantly, holding her close, his arms strong around her fragile body. For a moment, they stood like that, too close, their eyes meeting. Time seemed to stop. Neither spoke, but both felt the truth that was growing between them. When he gently helped her back to the chair, neither could shake off the feeling of that moment. As she continued to recover, she began to rebuild her life outside the hospital. She visited her home again, though it felt strange after so many years. She reconnected with some old friends, though many things had changed. Yet, she always found herself wanting to return to the hospital, because that was where he was. The hospital was no longer just a place of pain for her, it had become the place where hope, life, and something new had started. Her family sometimes wondered aloud what would happen when she was fully recovered. Would she return to her old life of business and power? Or would she choose a simpler path? She didn't have the answer, but she knew one thing: her heart was no longer the same. The woman who had once lived only for success had now discovered something far greater, the value of love, of kindness, of the human connection that had brought her back from silence. The young doctor was facing his own questions. He knew people might judge him if he revealed his feelings. They would say it was unprofessional, that it wasn't right to fall for a patient. But how could he deny what his heart was telling him? He had stood by her for years, not for recognition or duty, but because he truly cared. Now that she was awake, his heart refused to remain silent. And so, their days continued, filled with unspoken emotions. She grew stronger with each passing week, walking longer distances, speaking with more confidence, even laughing more freely. And with every step she took, he was there, supporting her. Inside both their hearts, the truth was quietly blooming. Gratitude had turned into affection. Affection had grown into something deeper. They both knew it, but they were waiting for the right moment, the right time, to finally admit it. The world had thought her story ended years ago when she fell into a coma. But now, as she stood on her feet again with the young doctor beside her, it was clear that her story was only beginning. A story not just of survival, but of a bond that had been born in silence and was now growing into something more powerful than either of them had ever expected. Life after the hospital was both exciting and frightening for her. She was no longer the woman who had once ruled boardrooms and traveled the world with endless energy. She was different now, gentler, more thoughtful, and aware of how fragile life could be. Each sunrise felt like a gift, each step she took felt like a small miracle. But even as she began to adjust to the outside world again, one truth remained unshaken in her heart. The young doctor had become more than just the man who treated her. He was the reason she had made it through the years of silence. At first, she tried to convince herself that what she felt was only gratitude. After all, he had been her voice when she had none, her hope when everyone else gave up. But gratitude alone could not explain the way her heart lifted every time she saw him, the way her hands trembled when he smiled at her, or the warmth that spread through her when he stood near. She had been given a second chance at life, and with it came feelings she had never expected, feelings that frightened her but also filled her with joy. He, too, was fighting a quiet battle within himself. He had promised to stay professional, to care for her as a doctor should. Yet, as the weeks went by, he found it harder to ignore the bond that had grown between them. He remembered every night he had sat by her bed, every story he had read to her, every moment when he believed in her while others doubted. Now that she was awake, the distance he tried to keep was slowly breaking. One afternoon, after a long therapy session, she asked him to sit with her in the hospital garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rustle of leaves and the laughter of children visiting their families. Then she turned to him and said softly, "I don't know how to thank you. You gave me back my life." He shook his head gently. "No," he replied. "You gave yourself back your life. You were the one who fought through those years. I only stood beside you." "But you didn't just stand beside me," she insisted, her voice trembling with emotion. "You stayed when no one else believed. You spoke to me, you cared for me, you gave me a reason to come back. I don't know if I would have opened my eyes without your voice guiding me." His eyes softened, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. He wanted to tell her everything, that she had become the most important part of his life, that he had waited for her without even realizing it. But fear held him back. He was still her doctor, and the world would not easily understand. So instead, he only smiled and said, "I'm glad I was there." The silence between them was heavy, filled with words left unspoken. She looked away, hiding the tears in her eyes. Deep inside, she knew that what she felt was not one-sided. There was something in the way he looked at her, in the way he listened, in the way he celebrated her smallest victories. It was not just care, it was love, quiet but undeniable. As the weeks turned into months, she grew stronger. She began walking without assistance, speaking with more energy, even laughing freely with her family. She started visiting her old business office, slowly learning about the world she had left behind. But no matter how much she tried to reconnect with her old life, she realized she was not the same person anymore. The woman who once lived only for success now valued simpler things: peace, relationships, and the joy of being alive. Her family noticed the change in her. They also noticed the unspoken bond between her and the young doctor. One evening, her mother took her hand and said gently, "You don't have to hide it from us. We can see how much you care for him. And I think he cares for you, too." She felt her face warm with embarrassment, but she couldn't deny the truth anymore. Her mother's words gave her courage, though she still wondered if he would ever say the words out loud. Fate, however, has its own way of arranging moments. One rainy evening, she was scheduled for a late therapy session, but most of the hospital was quiet. The corridors echoed with the sound of raindrops tapping against the windows. He walked in with an umbrella in his hand, a rare smile playing on his lips. "The city is flooded outside," he said lightly. "But at least we're dry here." She laughed softly, and for a moment, the years of silence between them felt like nothing more than a distant memory. They talked for a while about small things: the weather, the hospital, the changes in the city. But slowly, the conversation turned deeper. "I used to think my life was complete before the accident," she said quietly. "I had money, success, everything people dream about. But when I woke up, I realized that none of it mattered as much as I thought. What mattered was the people who stayed. What mattered was the kindness that kept me alive." She looked at him directly then, her eyes shining with emotion. "And you were the one who gave me that kindness." He felt his heart race, his carefully built walls beginning to crumble. He took a deep breath, knowing he could not keep silent forever. "I never saw you as just a patient," he admitted softly. "Even when you couldn't move or speak, I felt something that kept me coming back. I tried to tell myself it was just duty, but it wasn't. It was more. I cared for you, more than I should have." Her eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of joy, of love that had finally found its voice. "I cared for you too," she whispered. "Even when I couldn't open my eyes, I felt you there. I don't know how, but I did. And now that I'm awake, I don't want to imagine my life without you." The rain outside grew heavier, but inside the room, everything felt still, as if the world had paused just for them. For the first time, they allowed themselves to acknowledge what had been growing between them for years. It was not just a bond of doctor and patient, not just gratitude or duty. It was love born in silence, nurtured in patience, and strengthened by hope. From that moment on, their relationship changed. It was no longer hidden in unspoken glances or quiet smiles. They began spending more time together outside the hospital walls, walking in the park, sharing meals, talking about their dreams. She discovered that he had always wanted to open a small clinic one day, a place where patients would feel more like family than numbers. She encouraged him, reminding him that dreams were worth chasing. He, in turn, reminded her that her life was far from over, that she could still do meaningful things, not for power or money, but for joy. Their love was not without challenges. People whispered, questioned, even criticized. Some said it was improper, others said it wouldn't last. But they had already faced something far greater than gossip. They had faced time, silence, and the edge of life itself. Compared to that, the opinions of the world meant little. Together, they built a new life, one not defined by the past or the lost years, but by the present they held in their hands. She began supporting charitable causes with more passion than before, using her wealth to help patients like her who had no one to believe in them. He worked harder than ever, but now with her by his side, reminding him that his kindness had changed not just her life, but her heart. In the end, her story was not just about survival. It was about love that grew in the most unexpected way, in the quietest place, between a woman who had lost everything and a man who gave everything without asking in return. She had once been a millionaire with power, then a patient with nothing, but now she was something far greater, a woman who had found love, hope, and a reason to smile again. And as they walked side by side into their new future, both knew that the years of silence had not been wasted. They had been the path that led them to each other. Their love was not ordinary, it was extraordinary, born not in words, but in the quiet strength of faith, patience, and an unbreakable bond.